No, that's okay. Anja, is that okay for you?
It's okay for me.
Okay, good. I'm fine.
Okay, it's a few minutes after 6, and I think we have about 15 or 18 people here, so it's a great turnout. We have Tom Hawley from Las Vegas. First time I think we've seen Tom, and Sarah from Voice of America, and Washington, Catherine Bennett from CNN, and Atlanta, Amy from Fox in Milan, Martin from Phoenix, Stefan Rimmermann, right, from Deutschlandfunk in Cologne, Stephanie Wolf, Public Radio Georgia now, I think.
Louisville, Kentucky.
Kentucky, formerly Colorado. Petra Gutta from RBB. Vladimir, our guest from Deutschlandradio. And Ryan from Public Radio in St. Louis. And Anja from ZDF TV. And Brian from MSNBC in New York. And Lane Lucky from Texas. What's the name of that station there in East Texas? Anyway.
Don't mess with Texas. Probably.
A nice little town in East Texas. Henry Mulak from California. David Wagner from a town in West Texas. Martin Buckel from CDF in Munich. And Pam Ortega, formerly from University of Oklahoma. So anyway, don't want to talk too much. Thank you, Vladimir and Anja, for talking to us about 30 years of German unification. It's a fascinating story that Germany is reunited in many ways, but in some ways it's not reunited. And Vladimir and Anja have both been on RIAS programs. We've had lots of good conversations about German unification. I'm a big fan of East Germany. I always have been. I wrote a book about a Bruce Springsteen concert in East Berlin, and I still think it's such a fascinating story that East Germany and West Germany are not quite the same, and there's differences. And I love talking to East Germans. I think East Germans have gone through a lot of turbulence in their lifetimes, much more than any of us can imagine. So anyway, I don't want to talk anymore. Anja and Vladimir can talk, and then we can ask some questions. So thanks, Anja, and thanks, Vladimir.
Who wants to start? Are you or?
I'm afraid you'll have to start. Ladies first. I love to listen to you.
It was not so easy. I really thought about how to introduce, but I just start with my name and a little about my history, and then maybe there are some questions about it. My name, okay, Anja Heyde, and I'm journalist by ZDF, Eric said, but I'm also a journalist and moderator by MDR, that's German Public Television. ZDF is broadcasting nationwide, and the MDR2 but they deal with regional topics. That means that topics that concern the 3 federal states, Saxonia-Anhalt, and Thuringia, all former GDR. So, and I've personally grown up in Saxonia, just 70 kilometers from Dresden. So that's the capital of Saxonia. There where the Pegida demonstrations started in 2014, no, 15, I think. And I grew up in Weidheim. It's a small town in Saxonia. Before 1989, they had nearly 10,000 residents or inhabitants, and now 30 years later there are not quite 8,000 inhabitants, and that has done a lot to the city because mainly young people left, and with them a lot of future, and the old people left behind. But that's one thing maybe we can talk about later. And when the wall fell, I was 13, and I remember the time my brother, he's 11 years older than me, he drove to Leipzig where the demonstrations took place. And I remember my parents' fear of not knowing for sure whether he's coming back or not, because nobody knows exactly how the GDR government would react to the demonstrators. Would it remain peaceful there, or would the army be deployed? Would he might arrested? Nobody knows. And the police and the army get into the demonstrations. That was one of the points. And it was a big issue between my brother and my parents, especially in the last weeks before the war came down. And I remember the years after, the 1990s, the years after the wall came down, as a really chaotic time, I would say. And I remember a kind of politically vacuum. We had visible a lot of right-wing radicals who lingered in the streets and waited for victims. I was one of them, because I belonged more to the left spectrum, and it was not uncommon that we had to run away from for them after a visit from a discotheque or a youth club or something like that. And maybe this was different to Leipzig, Vladi, because first it was a big city, and second, more international, because they got this whole trade fair stuff.
Yeah, I we are actually both from Saxonia, which is nice. I'm born in a little town close to the Polish border, but my parents moved to Saxonia when I was 2 years of age, so I don't remember anything from that. But Leipzig is the place where I grew up, and I'm not sure if you have all heard of this place, but that's actually the city where most of the rallies, the demonstrations took place and started off already in the summer of '89. And the summer of '89, I've been 15. So there was a mixture between like kind of teenage adventurous approach to the whole thing. I wanted to impress a young girl, which I fell in love with. So I went to the demonstrations not only for political reasons, and it was a great time. I didn't understand everything at that time. I was probably a little bit too young, but for me, you know, the teenage time and the growing up, the getting an adult, fell together with the whole political, let's say, crawling of East Germany, and it just came at the perfect moment for me. The wall came down, and I didn't need to decide, you know, if the GDR would have been there longer, I probably needed to do some political compromises and to decide myself if I want to stay or not, what kind of profession I want to have later on in this kind of dictatorship circumstances. But the wall came down at the very right moment for me. So then I finished school in the 90s, and everything was open and great, and it was clear for me to get a journalist, which wouldn't have been an option, obviously, if the wall wouldn't have come down. And yeah.
So you both spent more than
already all the rest, actually. So I feel very nicely represented, like East German biography-wise, by her.
You both spent more than half your life in United Germany. Do you feel like you're pan-German, like United German, or do you feel like you're East German? And do you think unification has gone well? Has 30 years of German unification been successful?
Depends very much on the perspective. Anja, what do you say? I mean, it depends very much on the perspective. You have a kind of very subjective, personal perspective. For me, it went perfect. I mean, for my life, it was the best thing what could have happened. And as I said, it opened up all doors for me, for my studies, for my traveling. You know, I traveled really heavily in the 90s, and could follow my dreams more or less. So for me personally, the follow the wall, the unification, and the living in this Germany now in 2020 is just the right thing. But for many others, there have been definitely some problems and troubles, and it depends very much on the generation you are talking of. Generation of my parents is much different to me. Anja mentioned that. I mean, I also have still kind of arguments, conflicts, political conflicts with my parents when I talk about East Germany. And I noticed that actually I decided to avoid any kind of political discussion in the future with the generation of my parents, because they have a different point of view, because they spend the most of their life, and especially their professional life, and they followed their careers in East Germany, and it wasn't like it's not just for people who really believed in a socialist system to have problems to say goodbye to East Germany. It's also for people who just spent a huge part of their lives. It wasn't as easy to, let's say, just to leave all of this behind. It's still with you.
That's, I think, the point which is common to all the East Germans, but that's the only point. And sometimes I take the
whole picture.
Yeah. It is important to understand one thing. The East Germans always were a complete heterogeneous group. That's what you said, Vladi. It depends from the perspective. And sometimes I think there are some media, also, especially here in Germany, who say something different. Der Spiegel, it's a famous weekly news magazine here in Germany. They titled, I think it's a year ago, Vladi, when they wrote, So ist er, der Ossi, you remember?
The East German, yeah.
So is the East German, the typical East German, and
a question mark was behind it.
And then followed a story about the Pegida demonstrations and the people who are going to these demonstrations. And everybody knows what the Pegida demonstrations is, or have I?
Go ahead and tell us.
Okay.
Explain it.
Okay. Pegida is a patriotic Europeans against Islamization of Occident, Abendland.
Of the West.
So it's founded in 2014, I think. In 2015, they started with their demonstrations when I think about 800,000 refugees came to Germany. And it started in Saxonia, in Dresden, and it became a big movement. And all we heard in this time about the East Germans, they are kind of right-wing. They are against refugees, and that's what made me, and that's really a special point. I really become to an East German in the last years, because I always have to explain they are not all like this. I am different, and the East Germans are all different. They are all heterogeneous, and they are not all Pegida, and they are not just all right. And that's something what made me a little bit sad about the last years, because there is not the typical East German, but what we all have is a shared experience. Nobody can take us, and that's we have gone through a big transformation process all together, and it makes something to the people. That's the point.
It actually produces also good things. I mean, this experience of having gone through such a heavy transformation. Yeah. There are also books written about this, how East Germans much better adapt actually to globalization and to a whole new, let's say, setting of economy and politics and so on. The best part of the East Germans are, I think there's much truth about that. The best part of the East Germans are much more ready for a new world.
Mm-hmm. It's also interesting that
I wanted to say something positive. So
yeah, I mean, East Germans also have a lot less corona infections than West Germans. That's another fascinating issue. The number of COVID-19 in Eastern German states is much, much lower, and nobody really knows why. But there's other things too, like a lot of East German journalists that I've met, especially those who go to West Germany, they say that East Germans are different. They're not as good as selling themselves. They're not as loud as West German journalists. And East German journalists sometimes are a little quieter about their background, whereas West Germans are all proud and big mouthed all the time. Do you think that's the case, that East Germans are not as confident. They don't have sometimes as much self-confidence as West Germans. They don't sell themselves as well.
I know what you say. Not true.
That's difficult. That's really a difficult point. Maybe I try to describe it out of my experience. When I came to ZDF, it was a completely different surrounding. The people around me had completely different history. There were not such a lot of East Germans. So when I moderated the ZDF Morgan magazine, and I talked together with Mitri, we talked sometimes about different things. He didn't know my East German history, and yes, it is another kind of thinking about or out of my experiences, and it was a little bit difficult for me to find a way to deal with. Now it's okay, but it took years to me to understand what happened. I mean, I was young, like you, Vladi, and it is a process. And yes, I think there is one thing true about what you said, Eric, and that's when the society is higher accepted as an individual, and that's what in the GDR was common. Then you're not as loud as for yourself as and other people maybe, but it's too easy to me to say that's because I'm an East German. But it's right that also made something to us if individuals are always seen as a whole, as a society, and not as individuals.
We have to keep in mind that we are talking of 30 years later, you know.
Yeah.
It's almost two generations, let's say a generation and a half, you know. So there are many young people who are 20 now, 25 or something, who never experienced East Germany, like GDR, the system, the political system. Then they maybe grew up in East Germany. They have parents who experienced the GDR, the East German political system, but they don't have any own kind of experience, and they are different than like our, let's say, middle generation born in the 70s. We are once again different to our parents. So it very much depends on the generation you are talking about. But there is one thing what really amazed me in the last couple of years, that some, let's say, East German traditions or East German perspectives or East German, let's say, characteristics actually are being given to the next generation, you know. So there is something East German even to people who never experienced a GDR, you know? And also some let's say biography wounds or some situations, you know, which were hurtful in history, are given, you know, let's say, to the next generation. And that's what I'm really concerned of, you know, that these wounds don't heal, obviously, to the, like say, in the next generation and so on. That's why you have young people, whatever, who vote for right populist parties, saying, you know, the other parties don't accept my East German identity or whatever. But this is what they take from their parents. It's not their own experience, you know. It's the parents who tell them, you know, we are different than the West Germans.
But that's that's a funny thing about we both are some points different, because I think that's not just a feeling. That's what this kind. If you've stayed in East Germany, in Saxonia, or in Saxonia-Anhalt, or in Thuringia, then you feel that you a kind of person which is not really accepted is such a, it's difficult to describe for me, because but it's a kind of trauma. It's a kind of wounds which really doesn't heal or healed in the last years. Because I mean, you wrote it, Eric, in your description about this Zoom meeting today. The wages, the pensions, whatever, it's all lower in East Germany. I mean, it's 30 years later, and that's what the people see. They can see it, and also the children, the next generation, my generation, and you, Vladi, we are old enough to see what happened. And sometimes Thomas de Maizière, he was, among others, our interior minister. He said years ago, for East Germans, everything changed. For West Germans, just the postal code changed. So I don't know if I really can describe what happens to people when they the whole lives fall apart, when the political and the social system is changing, and millions lose their jobs, and suddenly the future and the change you have longed for, really longed for, the people, that was the reason why they went on street for such a long time, just frightens you at a certain point. And that's what happened, and that's what's inside. Maybe if you would describe it as an East German soul, maybe this is the East German soul, this kind of transformation process which is inside. It made us stronger. I believe that, and I believe in the success of this reunification. But it also made a lot of wounds, and they are still open, and that's what we see now.
It's a fascinating question, and most of the RIAS participants are from West Germany. East Germans don't apply as much, and that's one of the things we're working on, trying to get more East Germans into the program. So I just lay awake all night wondering why East Germans don't apply as much. So maybe you can help. Anyway, we have some questions coming in. Michael in New York, he's driving his car. Can you ask your question, Michael, or should we read it for you? Wait,
he's writing about a Trabant.
Michael, are you driving a Trabant?
You know, but my question involves the Trabant, and perhaps this is how do you say in German, amerikanische Aussicht, our American point of view. But I was wondering, you're living in two countries so close together, so separately. What did East Germans think as you're waiting 10 years to buy your Trabant, and then someone drives over for the day from the West in a big BMW or Mercedes-Benz, or you're waiting in line because they have bananas at the corner shop, and you see the KaDeWe filled with goods in Berlin. I just don't understand, what did you say to yourself when you saw the prosperousness of the West compared to what was less prosperous in the East? How did that make you feel?
Well, you're asking children, actually. You know, we are talking of being like 12, 13, 14 years of age. So I don't know about you, of course. I mean, what you had in East Germany, you had these Western shops. I don't know if you heard of that. They were called Intershop, where you could buy things with Western currency, Western valuta. You couldn't use your East German marks, obviously. So, but it was an open place, so you could go in there and just get a glimpse of the Western world, not only from TV. We could watch Western TV, but this is just the screen. But that's what I did sometimes, to be honest. Coming from school, there was an Intershop pretty close to our school. So sometimes I just needed a little bit, some nice smell, some nice Western smell, and whatever, Rick Ray's gum, and whatever, Coca-Cola. I've been there for half an hour and looked around and went out of it again. I could live with it. But I've been a child. It wasn't actually. I don't know, Anja, about you, but this like didn't break my heart that I couldn't have Coca-Cola, to be honest.
It was just, but I will never forget the moment if you entered this shop,
Yeah.
the smell.
Yeah, the smell. This smell tells a lot. Yeah.
About shampoo and Wrigley's and whatever. And this smell is something of my childhood, also Intershop. After the war fell, we were free. And we were free to buy everything. But freedom can be very exhausting if you are not used to it. And suddenly we had to decide about a lot of things, which car you want to buy, or which health insurance. It sounds so simple for people who are used to it, but in East Germany you didn't have to think about that. So all you think about was, where do I get the sink for my bathroom I want to extend? Life was complicated in another way. We were some kind of champions of improvisation, but sinks, cars, and even shampoo were suddenly there in abundance, and you had to decide about simple things, but also about things which maybe would have a great impact for your further life. And this great choice, it was overwhelming in every way. And I think you can remember, Vladimir.
Of course I can. Of course I can. But I don't know. In the retrospective, maybe, I don't know, people see things different after years, you know. So I'm not sure if I'm totally right about what I felt in these days, but looking back now, I have the impression that, you know, this whole material thing wasn't as important for me as the feeling of being able to travel wherever I wanted to. This was for me as a child the most important thing, actually, to travel wherever I wanted to, you know, just to get on the plane and, you know, wherever. And this was for 99% of all East Germans just impossible, you know. The only places they could travel to were Eastern Europe, and you know, many just, you know, there was this, the first thing I did was traveling to Paris. Paris was a place for me I needed to see immediately. And, you know, it became a myth. And this was, I don't know, I didn't have so much money, so I didn't care. I couldn't care so much about material things at the end of the day. So the traveling thing. And this is something, for example, to, you know, to build a bridge to these days, when we have for all these traveling restriction in Corona times, you know. I'm not the only person with East German biography who is, at least in parts, reminded of a very strange feeling of not being able to travel where you want to. You know, there's a little trauma to this, to be honest with you. So I really, in a moment, I really feel bad about being stuck in Germany, more or less, you see. So this is something which is important for me, traveling, freedom.
I would like to interject here in the sense that I grew up in Anaheim, a new German town. It's now a big city where Disneyland is in Southern California. And I started learning German when I was a child, because we had a Wahl zwischen Deutsch, Französisch, and Spanish. And so we, then in college, I took, and so an exact flip side of that, we had like political science and teachers that would want us in the West that were going through some of these language trainings to experience that, to experience some of that trauma, even down to the toilet paper. For example, I had a Danish teacher. It was my first year in college language. I'd already taken, you know, through the gymnasium or the high school. And so I was pretty good with my German. And but he was a Danish. He was Danish, teaching German in Southern California, and he every year, as part of his way to pay for going back home, would lead a group of his American students. And he really made the point of going through Checkpoint Charlie, getting us the 25 Deutschmarks and the funny money. We like to call it funny money, the aluminum money, as opposed to the real Deutschmarks, and to complain about the toilet paper. See, the toilet paper is rougher here. It's soft. And so to give us that feeling of, see, this is East Berlin, but this is the best you're going to get, because that's in the outside land or in the other Eastern lands area, you're not going to get anything like this here. The stores have some things in them, but they're all empty back there. So
it's about the details. It's about the details. You're right. Yeah.
So it's just one experience there. So I went. This is 1981, 82, and then to experience that. So anyway, I just thought I would interject with that.
Okay, thanks, Henry. Catherine Bennett from CNN in Atlanta has a question. Catherine, go ahead.
Hi there. So nice to hear your perspectives. It's fascinating to me as an American. I was born in 1971, so I'm 48. So I have memories of it too when I was in school. But I wanted to ask you, now that so much time has passed, do you find that you personally have a nice mix of East and West German friends, or do you feel like the two sides still socialize separately? And do you think this depends on which generation you're from? And this question is for both of you.
I know.
That's what you said, Vladdy. It depends on where the people live. And you're right, Catherine, sometimes how old they are. My parents have contact to a lot of people in their surrounding, but I think that's not different to people who live in Berlin or wherever. I think it doesn't matter in any way where you come from. And I've got friends, I often don't know if they come from East or West Germany, and I don't ask for it.
That's an important thing to say. Excuse me, there's one important thing. You don't ask at the very first moment, you know? And sometimes you don't really know.
Do that.
Right?
People from Western Germany do that sometimes.
I don't know. It depends what subject you talk about, you know?
I wonder if there's anything that makes it obvious. Is there an accent that's different, or certain words that are slightly different?
The smell.
If you come from Saxonia, then yes.
It's a very good question. You know, my wife, when we got to know, it's already more than 20 years ago, but she really liked the first dates we have. She thought I'm from the West. You know, it took us at least 3 or 4 dates to make clear that we have a similar biography. So that's why, and so many people, in my case, think I'm from the West. Sometimes cliches just don't work out.
The funny point about Vladdy and me is normally people would instantly realize that we're from East Germany because we're both from Saxonia. And Saxonia has a really special accent. A lot of the soldiers which were on the border were often from Saxonia. So if you came from West Germany to East Germany, then some soldier was standing in front of you, and the first thing you hear were, "Schönen guten Tag, ich möchte Ihren Ausweis sehen." So that's what West Germans often think about the East Germans. They're all speaking Saxonian. That's not true.
But that's a cliche, yeah.
Yes. And we both, that's what often happens to me. If the people realize I'm from East Germany, and especially from Saxonia, they're gonna ask me, really? That's the point. I'm sometimes a little bit...
Same for me, the same to me. Exactly the same reaction, yeah. 90% are amazed about this. And this shows to me that, you know, you can't really live with, you know, with these, let's say, images you have about East Germany. East Germans are as different, as heterogeneous as West Germans, you know. But there is something that lately I heard the theory, which I think is right. There is, in Germany, generally speaking, if there is a, let's say, political, historical identity, then there is an East German identity, but there's no West German identity, interestingly enough, you know. Maybe that's why it just catches your eye so much that, you know, there is this East German thing, because East Germans talk more about their biography, their identity, than West Germans do. So, but speaking of friends, good question actually. It's a good mixture. I think at the end of the day, more with a West German biography. If I look on the list of my friends, it's probably more from the West. Yeah, it's a bigger part of Germany. I mean, we are 80 million, 16 million live in the East. So it's just a math. You meet more West Germans. It's easy. It's easy as that.
Okay, Tom Hawley in Las Vegas has a question. Go ahead, Tom.
Yes, my perception, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but my perception is that East Germany tends to be more right-wing politically than West Germany tends to be more left-wing politically. So I'm sort of surprised that the coronavirus rates are lower in East Germany, because at least in the United States, the same people who are anti-immigrant are also the same people who are pro-gun and who are against restrictions, masks, and social distancing. So in the United States, right-wing sort of translates to behavior that would allow the coronavirus to spread. So I don't know, is there a theory of why coronavirus rates are lower in East Germany? And am I right about the politics, or perhaps I'm wrong?
Speaking coronavirus has one. There's one reason that, I mean, it's been asked a lot of times why actually in East Germany there is a lower spread of coronavirus. There could be two reasons. I think one reason is that like East Germans, generally speaking, once again, it's not all East Germans, but many of them don't travel as much as West Germans. So they stick to their villages and their places. So there's not much exchange, themselves traveling and not as many people visiting. So this is one of the reasons. And the other thing is, but this, I'm not sure if this is already proven by scientists, that you have a higher vaccination rate in East Germany. So they are, let's say, more prepared for whatever virus problems. So, but this is not, I'm not sure if this is already scientifically proven, but that's the theory.
Another theory is that East Germany is less populated than the West, less densely populated, a lot more rural states in the East. And as far as the politics go, East Germany has a high level of voters for the AfD, the far-right party, like 15 to 20% compared to 5% in the West. But East Germany also has a very high level of support for the far-left party, the left, the Linken. So you can't really say the East is more far-right than the West, I don't think. It's not similar to the US in any way. There are more far-right voters in the East, but there are a lot more far-left voters as well.
And interestingly enough, the far left and the far right, they are united in, let's say,
conspiracy.
Maybe, but in, let's say, whatever, strengthen the East German identity.
Yeah.
This is where they actually are pretty close to each other. They approach from a different political angle, but still nurture this whole, let's say, identity thing in East Germany.
Yeah.
Okay. Ryan Delaney in St. Louis. Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm realizing after your comment that this might not be quite a East-West divide thing, but a story that I'm looking into is sort of attraction to some of the far-right and extremist ideology among younger generations. And you two were both kind of that last generation to really remember growing up in East Germany or to be teens. But, these younger people don't have those memories. So I'm curious if you have any theories or ideas as to where the attraction is to some of this ideology and what's drawing young people in.
Anja.
I was obviously left because of my how I was walking through the streets. And that was the point why I was often, in the 1990s, some kind of victim. We always have, I told that we always had to run away from right-wing radicals, or from obviously Nazis. We could see them. They were as old as me, 14, 15, maybe a little bit older, 17, 18. And they now as old as me, and they're now voting. And it was Christian Bangel, it's a colleague from the Zeit. He wrote some days ago for the Bundeszentrale for Politische Bildung. It's a special institution here in Germany for political
education, probably.
Education.
I'm not sure if that's the right word.
Education.
Yeah.
And he wrote this generation who has a lot of fear for their future in these years, and who was in this political vacuum, what I described. They're now grown-ups, and they didn't really change their minds. They're still there, but it's our 25%. That's what Eric said. In Sachsen-Anhalt, Saxonia-Anhalt, it's the highest rate of AfD voters was 25%, and it's getting lower now. But there are people who say they're still there. That's my generation, our generation, and the younger ones, I'm not sure. Yes, they are infiltrated, and it's obviously we can see, but not as massive as in our generation. I think that's what I'm reading about.
Okay.
I would answer Ryan's questions with simply, they don't know what to believe in, Ryan. I think Vladimir pointed that out with West Germans, not really, Vladimir made a good point about West Germans. And even in where I grew up, we didn't know what we believed in. But we knew that there was an East and a West, a communist and a capitalist, and we had polls to go. We believed in this way, and now that after 30 years, what did we stand for? Just like my East German friend, I can't believe I'm saying that, East German friends. My East German friends, why did the wall have to come down? So I could go shopping? What do we stand for? It's a problem we're having in the United States right now. And so they're looking, there's so many people just like looking to grab onto something. And the educational system here is so bad that, they just need some kind of ideology and what are they going to tap into? The African-American culture? No,
it's one of the ironies too that there's few foreigners in Eastern Germany, but the anti-foreign sentiment is a lot higher, even though a lot of East Germans, especially in Saxonia, never meet a foreigner, they never see a foreigner, and yet the anti-foreign sentiment is sometimes higher in places in Germany where there's hardly any foreigners. But yeah, anyway, I'm sure you'll dig into that question when you're on your trip. And
there's one. Yeah, Anna, go ahead.
No, there's just one thing. I think that's what Henry said is it's one point. I try to near myself them. It's all about identity. It's all about identity, and there is one thing we've got a debate now about elites. I think I saw it yesterday in the Heute Journal. Just 1.7% of East Germans are in top positions in industry and government. And that's a point that's really difficult for East Germans to understand 30 years after the reunification. Mm-hmm. It has a historical background. After the reunification, we had a complete exchange of the elites in politics, in economy, and some even in culture. And
also in science is important.
Also in science, yeah. And that means that till today, East Germans are not able to come in top positions in even in this areas. because elites recruits themselves, and that's a point we have to today, and it's barely to understand for East Germans why they've got no voice in this area. Although they are, how many percent we are from the, I mean, 15, 20?
I didn't do my math. I think
20%.
20%. That's okay, but that's less. That's half of the inhabitants of North Rhine-Westphalia.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to, you know, every time you have to keep this in mind. I mean, you know.
But you get more people from North Rhine-Westphalia in top positions as from.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not only a question about the numbers. Of course not. No. That's right. And that's a trauma for many people. For example, for my parents, who have been scientists, who, you know, didn't have any problems after the fall of the wall. They found new jobs, but still they felt, you know, suddenly. I mean, they both worked in a scientific field and were suddenly, like, from one day to the other, confronted with evaluation committees who they had to represent themselves in front of these committees and explain what they did and you know, what science has from their research and so on. So they had to explain, they had to justify their work, which they had been doing already for 20, 25 years or something, you know, just because the country they were living in, you know, was crawling and was, you know, wasn't there anymore. So, and this was, I think, a trauma for many scientists also, you know, that they, even you know, like whatever, in a math field or chemistry and so on, you know, they still had to justify their work and had to explain and had to do reports and so on. And this is, and I think this, this really produced traumas.
This ties in really nicely to the next question from Brian Weekland at MSNBC. Brian?
Hi, guys. This discussion I find very fascinating. And I was just curious. I know you guys said when the wall came down and Germany reunited, you guys were in your youth. But I'm curious, are people your parents' age, older generation, people who are retired in the East, do they, are there things that they long for, things that they talk about that, you know, they think were better during the time in the East that they miss or that they reminisce about or that they wish existed today?
Yeah, I know. For me, there's nothing. For me, there's nothing, but that's me. I mean,
I can just talk for my parents. I can't talk for all the East Germans. That's what I tried to say. The biographies are also different. And I know my parents would have liked to have a more, my mother is now 72 and they have, she has to work. She has to work because the money is not enough. Her pension is too small to live from it. So yeah, she has to work. And that's what her wish was for the years after she ended her working life, that she could go on journeys or whatever. And that's what she counts. And that's what she's missing. And that's the one point where she sometimes thinks about if that would have been better if the GDR would still be there, but she don't want to have it back, never ever. And I think it's difficult to describe because everyone is missing something else. But there's one point, and I think that's the real, or for me, the important point is this transformation, this experience of transformation that all have, and that makes the East Germans to they much more now world champions in improvisation than in the time before, and it made us much stronger than we are before. And that's the funny thing about, I think, after the 30 years, it was a success. Reunification was a success. And I don't know if people, if you ask them in private life, there are a lot of studies about it, then they all saying, also in East Germany, they are satisfied. They've got a good life.
But they still miss something, no? I mean, it's a question that what you put, you know, like even for people, that's interesting. I mean, because it's obviously it's much more than just, you know, your working life and how much money you make and I don't know how your kids are doing. There is obviously something missing for many people, especially the generation of my parents, that their stories hadn't been told. That's what they think. That's what they feel. You know, and their stories are not respected. You know. Mm-hmm.
That's again about identity.
Yeah. It's more. It's not so much about the material aspect of it. It's much more about the emotional. You know, the emotional aspect. And sometimes it's difficult even to explain it and to put it into words. You know, there is something about this. You know, what is something like, you know, West Germans just don't understand my life. They don't understand what I did in East Germany. They don't, you know, I can talk to them for hours and hours in a row, but still many think they just don't understand me. We speak the same language, it's the same words. We are even friends, but there is something which is unexplainable.
Okay, Sarah Williams in Washington, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to, I read this down. Yes, this is a really great discussion. Vladimir, you mentioned that unification made your career as a journalist possible. Considering the restrictions on the press during the Nazi period and then the GDR, the residents of the East had no press freedom for many decades. How did how has the East adjusted to the opening of information, which really they were denied for a half century or more?
I'd say, I mean, it didn't take them very long time to really adjust to this new freedom of press. And many were really very much embracing the situation. I don't remember anybody who was like confused by the media. I mean, we're talking about 1989, 1990. This is like Middle Ages, speaking of journalism, you know, from today. So it's 30 years ago. It's a whole analog world. They had newspapers, we had some TV stations and radio, and this is it. No internet at all, no Facebook, no social media. I don't know what, you know, how the whole thing would have gone, how would have developed when we had, if we had social media at that time. So no, I don't remember anybody who had problems to orientate themselves. There were very many little interesting, nice projects of people who established newspapers from one day to the other, lost a lot of money, but still loved their jobs. Many of these projects, unfortunately, didn't survive the years to come. But no, it was a great time. I don't know, Anja, how you remember that, but I love this. All these new media outlets which were there. It was great. Many of them didn't survive, as I said.
I just remembered, it's another story, but maybe it's interesting in this connection. I'm grown up in Waldheim, and Waldheim belongs to this, it was just 70 kilometers away from Dresden. I told it, and this one is so-called Tal der Ahnungslosen, the valley of
clueless.
Yes,
clueless.
We didn't have Western TV. And the day when the wall came down, my parents heard from the neighbors that there something happened in Berlin, and so my father has to climb up on the roof to align the antenna, to try to get the Western TV, because we knew we would never get it from the German, the GDR TV, so we would never get the truth, not in the first line. So he climbed up on the roof, and I was on the stairs to the attic, and he was always shouting. My mother was sitting on the TV and trying to get the pictures in the TV, and then we could see the Western TV, because it was for us important to get another opinion, and maybe but you're right, maybe therefore a lot of
that's right, yeah, people were prepared for this.
and a lot of they were created a lot of you said it, you just said yeah, it's
yeah, media outlets are like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Amy, go ahead, go ahead, Vladimir.
Yeah, it's just one thing. I mean, this is probably a little bit specific, but the interesting thing is when I'm a little not angry. I'm not angry about this, but what is, let's say, ambivalent to see is that the newspapers, which were, it's difficult to explain. You had this kind of East German, very special in GDR times, before the fall of the wall, very special media system which was led by the leading party, the SED, which was the Communist Party, and they owned newspapers, regional newspapers. They were owned by the party or owned by other parties who were part of this, homogeneous East German political system. Anyway, there weren't like a privately owned newspaper. There wasn't such a thing like a privately owned media outlet. It was all owned by the party or by the state, and especially these big newspapers who had hundreds of thousands of subscribers in East German times and GDR times. They actually survived the fall of the wall, and are still there. Because they had all these subscribers, and West German, let's say, investors invested, of course, in the newspapers who had already hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and didn't invest very much in the newly established media outlets, which were much more interesting actually at that time. So that's why many of them financially failed, these little projects, because they hadn't had any Western investor. But the old East German Communist Party newspapers, they pretty fast, attracted Western money, and so they survived very nicely over the years.
Okay, Amy Kellogg in Milan has a question.
Unmute myself. I loved your stories about smell in those stores in East Germany that I guess were much like the Berioska shops in Russia during those years. And it made me wonder more about your childhood memories. I'm wondering what more you could share. Did you have a sense, other than you've talked about not being able to travel, but was there a sense of deprivation, or did you basically have happy childhoods? What could you share that you recall?
Anja, you definitely had a happy childhood, no? Come on.
Definitely a happy No, really. I mean, that's often what people from Western Germany ask me, well, how was your childhood? I had a happy childhood. It's unbelievable, but even in a dictatorship, you can have a happy childhood. There's one thing, but it's more about the Cold War. That we often talk about what happens between USA and Russia, but not what happens inside of the GDR. So we had a really peaceful and funny life, and it was, you won't believe it, really colorful. And that's just, but what, there was one point really, and that was the Cold War, which really affected us as a story and as a background story, even in my childhood. Because in the school you were always confronted with it in a political way. In your, I don't know if it was the same to you, Vladi, but yeah, or Vladi, to you in Staatsbürgerkunde. We had when you are confronted with political
ideology. I mean,
affirmations, Zuschreibung. Yeah.
Indoctrination. I mean, we were confronted. It wasn't. These weren't lessons. This was indoctrination. You know,
against the United States, right? The United States.
Yeah, not only, especially against West Germany, much
but
more.
Also,
against, yeah, but also against, of course, the empire of the evil wasn't in obviously not in Russia, but in the United States. Yeah, but we didn't take that seriously. I was, as I said, I was a teen, but I didn't take that seriously at all. We were definitely not taking seriously the whole East German idea. At least I just talk about myself, and I know about my friends in those times. We were 12, 13, 14 years of age. We started, reflecting about politics. And I remember that we were really, really laughing. We were almost laughing during lessons, and the teachers had to live with it. They knew that, there wasn't much time left for this political system anymore. They weren't stupid. They knew about that. So, but they still had to go through their curriculum. So that's why, it was a kind of deal. We were sitting there and waiting until the lesson was over, and chatting a lot during lessons, especially during these political lessons, and just having a laugh about it. Yeah, we knew about it.
It depended from the teacher, and there's just one short sentence. I think there was a gap between private life and political life, and this gap, you don't have to. We didn't close that because it was not. You lived your private life, and what happened outside there was there, but you didn't.
You didn't take it. Yeah. It wasn't so important. It just wasn't as important.
Yeah.
Okay, we're up a little over an hour. Maybe one or two more questions. Michael Gargiulio, I think he's not driving his car anymore. I hope he didn't crash. But he pointed out he lived in West Virginia for a while, and he thinks that the East German sense of identity was similar to Appalachia. I'll just pass that along for you to think about. And Tom Hawley, Tom, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, you were talking about people in the East tuning their TV sets in most of the East, except for not in the Dresden area, but other parts. Was it considered dangerous to watch TV? I mean, did you risk being caught watching TV and getting into trouble with the government?
Not in the 80s anymore.
No, not in the 80s.
Not in
maybe
the 80s.
Maybe before, but not in the 80s anymore.
Yeah. Absolutely not. It was absolute consensus. Everybody did it. Everybody watched Western TV.
In East Berlin, if you got lost on a foggy day, all you had to do was look up at the antennas and see which way they were pointed, and they were all pointed to the west. But I think in the 50s and 60s, the youth wing of the Communist Party would send people around to check to make sure people were not having their antennas pointed. Yeah. So it was a problem in the 50s and 60s, but in the 80s, everybody was watching.
No. You always have to keep in mind, we're talking here about, Anja's and my childhood was in the 80s, It's been the last years of East Germany. And we didn't experience East Germany of the 50s or the 60s, which was much more restrictive than in the 80s. Even though we had Cold War in the 80s, but still, there was Gorbachev, there was this reform movement from Moscow. It was a different East Germany than, let's say, in the 70s or 60s. Yeah.
Well, I hope you watched RIAS TV or listened to RIAS.
I listened to the radio. We definitely need to mention RIAS, because the RIAS radio, they had two programs RIAS 1 and RIAS 2, you could listen to them in Leipzig, which was great for me. And they had one station in Hof in Bavaria. And this was strong enough, physically strong enough to reach via FM Leipzig. And I really loved to listen to that.
Why was RIAS so interesting, or why did you like listening?
Totally different tone, great music, great hosts, and news I really wanted to listen to. You know, I couldn't listen to. I mean, listen to news on East German radio was ridiculous. It was propaganda, pure propaganda.
Okay. All right. Anything else, Anja, you want to say? Any last comments before we?
Last words.
Any famous last words? Anything you want to say? This has been a really interesting. I always enjoy hearing East German stories. I think Americans are fascinated by it as well. Anything you want to say, Anja?
I just want to say that the unification was really a success story. That's important to me. That's important to me to say, because I know we have a lot of, I don't want to say problems, but yes, there are some things which have to be solved, but we're in a good way. And I think sometimes we forget what really we have done the last 30 years, what we have really reached in this, I mean, just 30 years, you can say. That's not so much. And if you look at Poland or Hungary or whatever, where they are standing, then we realize what happened to us and how lucky we can be about the last 30 years.
Great.
Great final words. I don't want to add anything to this.
No.
I agree totally. It's I always want to say to all my American friends that East Germany is it's not a homogeneous place, you know. It's a very it's huge variety of people, and it's many different biographies. There are many West Germans who live in the East. Berlin is a different place. Leipzig is a different place. Dresden is another place. Always try to keep in mind that East Germany is as different as you know, any other place in Germany. It has another history, obviously, you know, but it's still an absolute let's say good part of the whole Germany, and especially the younger people, you know, they don't. I'd like them not to feel this historical weight too much. That's what I would hope for the future.
Maybe there's one thing we could add, Vladimir. East Germany has today as much inhabitants as in 1905. 1905,
yeah.
A long time ago. We've lost the last 30 years about 2.5 million people. But since 1 year, it switched. There are coming more people from west to east than in the other direction. And that makes me hopefully.
When East Germany lost 2.5 million people, they didn't die. They moved to West Germany where the jobs were. You made it sound like they were all dying.
Thank you for this explanation.
And now they're coming back. That is a really sad story. They didn't leave voluntarily. A lot of them left to go to the West because there were jobs in the West, and jobs in the East got taken away. So yeah, well, anyway, thank you very much for this enlightening hour. And we recorded this, so it'll be on the Facebook page if anybody wants to watch it again or tell your friends. And yeah, thank you, Anja, and thank you, Vladimir. It was a great talk. And they are also the leaders of the Berlin chapter, along with Petra Gute, who's also on the call. So if any of you ever come to Berlin and want to meet the Berlin chapter, talk to these guys, because they do a great job of running everything in Berlin.
It would be a pleasure to host you.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. And enjoy October 3rd is the anniversary, Saturday,
Yes,
30th
absolutely.
anniversary.
Yeah.
Think of
Great, thank you.
Yeah, think of United Germany and raise a toast to Germany on Saturday, October 3rd.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks again.